And we're back. All right. Easter's over. He is risen. Got some candy. Getting past the sickness that I've been fighting off. Got some tea. So I can talk for an hour. It's going to be good. All right. So, welcome back to the stream. So, a lot of leadership content can focus on surface level traits like charisma and confidence, or even presence, and even some of the deeper personality traits like conscientiousness and intelligence. And all those things certainly play a part in leadership, but they're not particularly helpful in sorting out how one might develop themselves as a leader, or how one might mentor someone as a leader. And personality is largely genetic. It's inheritable. It's stable over time. Confidence takes a long time to build. It's really hard to fake. And some people just aren't charismatic. And none of those things are skills that can be reliably developed. So it's not particularly useful or helpful whenever someone takes that approach to leadership. Fortunately, there's a lot of research that suggests a more accessible system is at work when it comes to leadership development. What I mean by that is there's a cognitive and developmental architecture that helps separates guesswork from mastery. And so I'm going to talk about it. Today, I'm going to go over 3 foundational studies that I think form a pretty interesting and high resolution map about how leaders can think, how they can grow, and how leaders can scale their effectiveness. And so we're going to do a review of my Friday stream, which is the 9 cognitive traits of leaders. We're going to do a deep dive into what's called the leadership Strataplex, which explains how skill requirements vary by role. And then we're going to do a quick synopsis of a timing model that maps when and how these skills can be developed. And so together, these studies give us what I think are a nice data-backed framework for building leadership capacity at any level of the organization. So to review, 9 cognitive skills study by Mumford and colleagues hypothesized that there are 9 interdependent cognitive skills that leaders apply in high stakes, high complexity situations. First one is problem definition. And that is spotting misalignments between assumptions and outcomes, enables an accurate framing of problems, not just reactions, but to symptoms. Second one is cause-goal analysis, which is identifying root causes and aligning them with strategic and realistic goals. Third is constraint analysis, which is understanding non-negotiable dimensions versus flexible limits, being able to plan realistically. Fourth is planning, so simulating action, identifying steps, obstacles in a temporal sequence. Next is forecasting, which is anticipating intended and unintended consequences, so second, third, fourth, fifth order consequences. Next is creative thinking, which is general, adaptive, and high utility options. Generating adaptive, high utility options. Next, and the 7th one in the list of 9 is idea evaluation. So being able to prioritize ideas by timing and fit and feasibility based on capability, capacity, resources, things like that. Next is wisdom, which is being able to apply values and ethics-based judgment and long-term thinking. And then last, and most importantly, from this study that I went over Friday, is sense making and vision, which is being able to create clarity and motivating direction through complexity. So again, from my stream on Friday, this study by Mumford and a couple of his colleagues, the most important finding from this study was that sense making and cause goal analysis were the highest correlated skills to leadership performance amongst the cohort that they studied. Secondly, forecasting and planning together when stacked outperforms intelligence as a general quality in leadership specific tasks. So there's a dimension to this study that indicates that the development of certain skills will outperform talent that is undeveloped. And then thirdly, that these skills seem to function as some sort of loose chain, meaning that they all are interdependent of each other, and that the weakest link in the cable, or the weakest link in the chain, undermines the whole strength of the chain. So it impacts your entire leadership performance. So the implication being either develop that weak link or look to draft a team that can fill in the gaps in your game. So that's the review of the 9 critical skills from my stream on Friday, which is going to be important later. And the next study that I'm going to discuss for this stream is what's known as the leadership Strataplex. And this study was done by a different Dr. Mumford, a guy by the name of Troy Mumford, Michael Campion, and Frederick Morgeson. So this Mumford is an assistant professor of management at Colorado State University, and he holds expertise in organizational leadership, work teams, and organizational culture. Michael Campion is a Herman C. Kranert Distinguished Professor of Management at Purdue University with expertise in industrial organizational psychology. He has research that spans employment testing, job analysis, work and team design, and personal selection, according to a quick Google search. And then lastly, Frederick Morgeson is the Eli Broad Professor of Management at Michigan State, and he holds expertise in leadership, talent management, job analysis, design, as well as organizational development. So these authors put forth a model that they named the Leadership Skills Strataplex. And what they're attempting to do with this is explain how leadership skills are both layered, so stratified by organizational level, and also diverse or complex across multiple different skill types. And this was the genesis of their term Strataplex, which combines strata, which infers layers, and complex, which infers that there's multiple parts. And so they are trying to capture how different kinds of leadership skills are required in varying amounts depending on a leader's level in the organization. So based on their review of prior research, this model is attempting to organize leadership into 4 broad categories. The first of which they labeled as cognitive skills. So they characterize this as problem solving and analytical thinking. The second of which is interpersonal skills. So communication, negotiation, influence, persuasion. So your people skills. The third and the next highest is business skills. So this is budgeting and operations and organizational specific skills. And then lastly is strategic skills, which is systems thinking, visioning, being able to connect complex systems and complex networks of things and people. And so they depict this model using this right here. So at the base and middle of the pyramid, they've got their cognitive skills. So according to them, it makes up the foundation and has the largest requirement of any of the skills. The next would be interpersonal skills. And then the next layer out would be business skills. And then the last layer and thinnest layer would be strategic skills. So their idea behind this is that they expect that cognitive skills are going to be the most important across all leadership strata, and that there's never going to be you're never going to not be required to have cognitive skills. And then as you move up the organizational ladder, the need for these different, more sophisticated skill sets are going to is what's going to be demanded of you. So let's get into the rest of this. Let's get that out of here. So again, the first and most foundational part of this Strataplex model is the cognitive skills. And Mumford and his colleagues consider consider the cognitive skills the foundation of leadership capability because they involve the mental processes needed for leaders to gather and process, understand, and communicate information effectively. And these skills are going to support a wide range of your day-to-day leadership activities and decision-making, regardless of level of the organization that you're at. And so the key components of this this part of the model, these cognitive skills, include information processing, which the authors define as the ability to collect and interpret and share relevant data and knowledge effectively. Oral communication, which the authors characterize as skills like public speaking, active listening, which are all crucial for conveying expectations and understanding team input and things like that. And then written communication, which the authors believe includes clear writing tailored to different audiences, as well as strong reading comprehension to process complex information. They also consider learning and adaptability, which they say leaders must learn actively, apply new information, adjust their behavior, and must leverage strategies to navigate evolving and non-routine challenges the higher up the organizational chain they go. And then lastly, the last component of cognitive skills are critical thinking, which the authors contend involve analyzing pros and cons of different approaches using logic and structured reasoning. And so ultimately, the cognitive skills, according to the authors, are what equip leaders to think clearly, learn quickly, respond to flexibility, and which all makes them essential at all levels of leadership and thus the foundation to all the other leadership skills. So moving on up the next layer of the Strataplex are interpersonal skills. And Mumford attempts to build on what early research has characterized as social capacities, human relations skills, or social judgments by defining interpersonal skills as the social and relational abilities leaders use to interact with, understand, and influence others, which I think is a worthy inclusion because interpersonal skills are critical for managing teams, aligning behavior with people that have differing agendas, different opinions, and then building trust across all levels of the organization. And so the key components of Mumford's set of interpersonal skills include social perceptiveness, which they define as the ability to accurately interpret others' reactions and understand the reasons behind them, which is essential for reading the room and adjusting your tone and responding appropriately to your audience. Coordination, which is characterized as aligning actions across people and roles and making sure that individual efforts contribute smoothly to whatever the group objectives are. It also includes negotiation, which is characterized as reconciling differing perspectives, resolving conflict, and finding common ground that supports team cohesion and productivity. And then lastly, persuasion, which is the skill of influencing others towards a shared goal by appealing to logic, value, shared interest, emotion, which is obviously a vital skill for gaining and maintaining buy-in and then leading change. So in other words, the interpersonal skills allow leaders to navigate the human landscape of the organization, which is a requirement that remains important at all levels of an organization. And it's also one that the authors of this study prove especially vital in frontline and mid-tier roles where direct action is more frequent and impact is more immediate. And we'll go into some of that later. But the next and third layer of Mumford's Strataplex are business skills. And the authors characterize business skills as the practical and functional competencies that leaders need to operate effectively within their specific systems and processes in an organization. And so they set out to determine whether or not and to what degree these skills become increasingly important as leaders move into mid-level and senior roles where resources decisions and operational oversight are both key. And so the key components of the author's characterization of business skills within their model is first, material resource management, which involves making informed decisions about acquiring, allocating, optimizing tools, technology, equipment, people, things like that. Second is operations analysis. So the ability to evaluate processes, systems, performance metrics across things and people, improve efficiencies, and impact organizational outputs. Third is personnel management. So leading people through the hiring process, the developmental process, motivating them day in to day out, performance evaluations, succession planning, development, mentorship, things like that. And then lastly is financial resource management, which involves budgeting and cost control and financial planning for teams and projects and business units and cross-functional teams and things like that. And so together, these business skills that the authors define provide the operational backbone of leadership, at least according to them. And so they allow leaders to translate strategy into action, and they ensure resources are aligned with goals and ensure that leaders are better able to deliver measurable outcomes through effective people and thing management. The last and highest level of Mumford's leadership skills Strataplex are strategic skills. And the authors contend that these strategic skills are the highest level of conceptual abilities that allow leaders to operate at a systems level. And these skills are essential for understanding organizational complexity, navigating ambiguity, driving long-term impact across large and dynamic organizations and environments. And they include 6 key components. And some of these should be familiar if you saw any of my content from my last stream. The first of which is visioning. So that involves creating a clear image of how the organization should evolve and what the future state should look like. The next is systems perception, which is understanding how different parts of the organization interact, detecting systemic shifts, and anticipating ripple effects of change. Third is environmental scanning. So that involves identifying upstream causes, downstream consequences of both internal and external events. The next one is causal mapping. So the ability to build mental models that define key variables and relationships and all the different complex dynamics in a leader's environment. The next one, fifth in the list, is problem identification, which involves diagnosing deep underlying organizational challenges as opposed to more surface level symptoms. And then the last one is solution appraisal, which involves evaluating and selecting the most effective course of action through logistical analysis and outcome modeling. And so to summarize those strategic skills, they're essentially what enable leaders to see beyond the present, make sense of complex problems, and then align their people and teams and systems toward a coherent long-term direction. And the authors at the time of their study expected to find that these are especially critical at the most senior levels of leadership, where ambiguity and scale and interdependence are all at their highest. So the authors set out to determine 4 things. First, that their skills model and the skills within the model are empirically distinguishable. Second, that the leadership skills are going to vary by skill category. More specifically, that the cognitive skills are going to be needed the greatest amount, followed by interpersonal, followed by business, and then followed lastly by strategic skills. They also set out to determine whether if the 4 layers of skill requirements, that being the cognitive, interpersonal, business, and strategic, will be positively related to the jobs level in the organization. Meaning, the higher you go up in the organization, each layer of skill category is going to subsume the one before it. So as you climb the organizational hierarchy, you will need all the skills that you already developed, plus the new ones that are required from the higher tiered role. And then the 4th hypothesis has 3 parts. First, the strategic skill requirements are going to be more strongly related to organizational level than cognitive, interpersonal, and business skill requirements. The second of the 3 parts is that business skill requirements will be more strongly related to organizational level than cognitive or interpersonal skills. And then the last part of the 4th hypothesis is that interpersonal skills are going to be more strongly related to organizational level than cognitive skill requirements. So, what did they find? Well, according to a bunch of statistical analysis in the study, their findings support their first hypothesis, meaning that leadership is not a single and undifferentiated trait. It consists of different skill domains. In the case of this study, it consists of 4 separate skill domains, each of which contributes uniquely to leadership effectiveness. So whether or not there are 4 separate skill domains or not, the point is, it seems like there's certainly not just one of them. The second hypothesis, according to the authors, was only partially supported, meaning that leaders do require different types of skills at different levels. However, the cognitive and interpersonal skills were rated as more essential than strategic skills, at least in terms of what they could empirically support. The third hypothesis was apparently fully supported, meaning that leadership skill demands increase across all the categories as leaders advance in an organization, which reinforces the author's idea that leadership development should scale and be tailored to role complexity. And then the 4th hypothesis was only partially supported overall, meaning leadership skills do not increase equally across all levels. And what I mean by that is strategic and business skills scale more sharply with leadership than cognitive and interpersonal skills, which confirms that as a leader rises in the organization, their work becomes more systems focused and resource oriented, not just interpersonal or technical. And to help explain that, the authors gave a pretty interesting chart here. So let me pull that up. So the red line is cognitive skill. The blue line is interpersonal skill. The orange line is strategic skill. And the green line is business skill. So cognitive skill decreased the least in terms of slope, but requires each level of the organization requires it the most, followed by interpersonal skill, and then strategic skill, and then the business skill had the highest slope, meaning it increased the fastest. The demand for it increases the fastest as an individual climbs the organizational hierarchy. So that's what they found. And all that means that skills accumulate over time. They don't necessarily shift, meaning once you learn a skill, a leadership skill that is required of you, you can't just put it down as you move up the organizational hierarchy. You have to take everything with you. Everything builds on the foundation that you have. So leaders shouldn't and can't abandon their prior skills. They need to bring them with them and just layer on new ones. Now, the third study, and next in our discussion, is done by Dr. Michael D. Mumford, which is the same author as the first study that we talked about. So the 9 critical skills, the one from my Friday stream, and then a couple other professors. A Dr. Michelle A. Marks, who's apparently the chancellor of the University of Colorado. A Dr. Mary Shane Conley, who's a professor of psychology at the University of Oklahoma. A Dr. Steven Zaccaro, who I actually see quite often in the leadership literature, who's a professor of psychology at George Mason University, and then a Dr. Ronnie Ryder Pullman, who's a distinguished professor of organizational industrial psychology at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And so this third study aimed to answer one central question, and that is, how do leadership skills develop over time? So the authors, in their theoretical discussion, emphasize that the current literature, at least at the time of this study, which I think was like early 2000s, suggested that leadership is not just about traits, but involves skill that are incurred through experience. And so the authors aim to examine how leadership knowledge and key skill domains change across different organizational levels. And to do so, they used a fairly large sample of U.S. Army officers. So in terms of the theoretical background on skill acquisition over time, there's 2 major traditions that the authors reviewed. The first is a performance-based model based on Ackerman's 3-stage model, which highlights how skill development evolves from learning basics and then assembling more sophisticated performance models and eventually to automation. And then secondly, they also discuss some various cognitive science models, which all in some way emphasize a gradual development of expertise through concept acquisition and then integration and then a flexible application. And so based on all this, the authors argue that at different stages in a leader's career are going to demand different types of experiences to foster appropriate skill development. So building on prior work, this Dr. Mumford focused on 4 types of leadership skills as he characterized them, which have a lot of similarity to the leadership skills Strataplex that we just discussed. So the first is leadership knowledge in the form of understanding organizational roles and structure. Second is problem-solving skills, such as creative and diagnostic thinking. Third is social skills, which is judgment and interpersonal navigation. And then fourth is system skills, which is managing complexity and constraints. And so this model by Mumford suggests that these skills all develop progressively, albeit at different rates across a leader's career path. And again, I think they overlay quite nicely conceptually with the Strataplex model and the 9 critical cognitive skills of a leader, both of which we already discussed. In terms of the method that this study used, they used a cross-sectional design of almost 1,800 Army officers across 6 ranks, so from first lieutenant to colonel, and grouped it into junior, mid-level, and senior leaders. These leadership skills from the cohort were all measured through scenario-based assessments that were rated by doctoral level judges. And then the researchers also examined and codified the influence of assignments, training, career development experiences at different points in all these leaders' trajectories. And they found 4 key results. First, skill levels increased significantly with higher rank, which is unsurprising. Secondly, mid-level leaders show an increase in complex principle-based understanding on their transition from low to mid-level positions, but they only receive modest gains in creative problem solving as they grow from low-level to mid-level leaders. Thirdly, senior leaders exhibited more integrated systems thinking and social judgment, which the authors suggest means that real-world experience and organizational understanding become more and more critical over time. And then lastly, that certain experiences matter more at specific phases of someone's career. And to expand on this, this seems to imply that technical training is going to be more beneficial earlier in a career, and then advanced problem-solving assignments or mentorship or development are going to be way more impactful as you go later and later in your career. So those are the 3 studies. We have the 9 critical cognitive skills of a leader. We have the leadership skills Strataplex, and we have leadership skills timing. So how do these all align with each other? Well, the way I would characterize it is that the leadership skills Strataplex provides the structure of how leadership skills are developed and what skills matter by which level. The development and timing problem that I just discussed gives you the sequence layer, which shows when experiences shape growth the most. And then the cognitive skills from Friday's stream and the first study that we discussed is the mechanism by which these skills are developed. So it shows how the mental skills drive performance. And together, what I think they partly answer are what skills to develop, when to develop, and then how they all work synergistically in action. And so if you align all 3, then you as a ambitious leader who wants to develop themselves, or perhaps you as a mentor is looking to help develop a younger leader, can do so with more precision as opposed to guesswork. So now we're going to go through different levels of leadership and what these studies all mean to the different levels of leaders in terms of their developmental process, or at least what they should be focused on in their developmental process. Got candy stuck in my teeth. And we're live. So, low-level leaders. Low-level leaders should be emphasizing 3 things. First, technical skill. And that is specific to whatever organization that you're a part of. But there's going to be a base level of technical skills that you have to acquire in order to start moving up your organizational hierarchy. The next is cognitive skills. So this is your reading, your writing, your listening, your thinking, how you process information, how you listen, how you define a problem, and your basic planning skills. And then there's going to be a point where you have to start introducing the more sophisticated interpersonal skills, which are required for the next level, So that is your communication, your coordination, feedback, and conflict navigation. So how you deal with people, because the higher up your organizational hierarchy you go, the more people that you're going to have to deal with. So in terms of why these prescriptions matter, early stage leaders are going to need more role clarity and more structured feedback than someone higher up in the organizational hierarchy, so they can internalize those building blocks of leadership as have been defined by the 3 studies that we've discussed. They need to learn and understand task execution, and then they need to learn to be able to shift from task execution to team direction. And to do that, you need your cognitive skills, and then you need to be able to deal with the people on the team. And so the lower level leaders benefit the most from immediate and rule bound structured learning environments. So if you're looking to train yourself or you're looking to train a lower level leader, I would suggest focusing on clear rules, clear performance metrics, using a step-by-step structure, and then use training situations or scenarios that allow for a lot of feedback. The training should build technical skill relative to their job requirements and mental models for effective communication and task leadership that's going to be needed by them at the next level of leadership. Mid-level leaders, what do you emphasize? Well, at this point, you need to bring all your cognitive skills with you from your lower level leadership experience, and then you need to make them more sophisticated. So more sophisticated planning, more sophisticated creative problem solving, and then more sophisticated cause goal analysis. Secondly, you need to start integrating business development, business skills development. So that is resource management, operations, and performance metrics. And then there's also the aspect of integration skills. So being able to work within and even lead cross-functional teams, cross-functional decision making, conducting constraint analyses, and then immediate forecasting. So bringing all the skills with you from your last role, making them more sophisticated, and then adding business skill development that you're going to need for the next level. Why do you do this as a mid-level leader? Well, mid-level leaders operate in complex environments. There's no doubt about that, but they're still semi-structured. They're not high enough up in the organizational hierarchy to where they're completely ill-defined. And at this stage, this is going to require leaders to coordinate people, coordinate resources, and coordinate priorities, all while dealing with some degree of ambiguity and operational trade-offs. However, it's not nearly to the degree that you're going to need at the higher level leadership. And then a mid-level leader's skills need to shift eventually from being the operator, being the one that is doing the actual work, to being the one that is orchestrating the system that the work is being done in. So how do you train this? Well, you should be emphasizing or seeking out stretch assignments, whether that is a new role or additional work within the same role, and then seeking out cross-functional project ownership, or at least cross-functional project participation, and then seeking out increased scenario complexity. So continuing to put yourself in situations that stretch your limits as a mid-level leader. And then ideally, you would also be able to start layering in some degree of exercising more and more judgment with complexity and contingency planning within whatever dynamic system that you're a part of. Upper level leaders. So, what to emphasize? Again, you have to bring with you all the skills that you developed already. So, your sophisticated cognitive skills, your sophisticated interpersonal skills, all your general sophisticated business skills. And then you have to start adding and layering in your strategic skills, which is visioning, systems thinking, environmental scanning, all on top of your ability to forecast and sense make and long range plan and navigate the politics and align stakeholders that you should have already learned. And why it matters for this level. Well, senior leaders are going to be the ones that have to lead through the most ambiguity. They are going to be the ones that are in a position to influence larger systems. They're in a position to shape culture and determine direction of an organization. And this highest level of leadership, the strategic level of leadership, requires someone to be able to causally map the environment, make ethical trade-off decisions, be able to use creative and adaptive foresight, all under ill-defined, low structure, high stakes environments. And so how do you train that? Well, I would start with placing the leader that you're mentoring, or placing yourself, if you're looking to develop yourself, in more uncertain and high complexity environments that have time delayed consequences. I would encourage you to reflect a lot, to refine your ability to build and articulate a vision, create simulations for aligning stakeholders, and then pre-failure modeling. So figuring out what it looks like for how things need to unfold in order to be successful, and then all the different ways it can go wrong along the way. So that's it. 3 studies, all super interesting by themselves, but I thought it was more interesting to try to synthesize them. All right, we're going to call it because I'm talking to myself.